Hello there. In the comment section below, someone just posted a hand history where they made one of the most common mistakes that people make in small and medium stakes cash games. And they didn't even think it was a mistake. It was just like an irrelevant point of the hand. What happened was someone raised, and then this player called from the small blind. Their hand doesn't even matter because you should not call raises from the small blind in cash games that charge a rake on individual hands for many reasons that we are going to cover today. Understand that in most live cash games, the casino takes 10% of the pot, usually capped at some amount, but in the small initial pot, when someone raises and then you call, they're usually taking 10% of that, which is a lot. Also, from the small blind, you will have the worst actual position in a heads-up pot, but also the worst relative position in a multi-way pot when you call from the small blind, because say someone raises, you call the small blind, and then the big blind calls, closing the action, which is fine. On the flop, you're going to check, the big blind's going to check, the initial raiser is going to bet some portion of the time, and then you have to decide what to do before you have any clue what the big blind does. And you have to understand the big blind's going to check everything so they can have all the good hands in their range. And this puts you in a really nasty spot with all of your medium strength hands, which is often what you're going to have. So that's really bad for you too. So they're taking a lot of rake. Also, you're going to have bad position. Also, you're going to drastically under-realize your equity from out of position. For example, say someone raises and you call from the small blind with pocket fives. The flop comes without a five. You check, your opponent bets. This is a spot where your pocket fives is very often good. But if the board contains 3 high cards, you probably just have to let it go. And you're folding out the best hand a decent chunk of the time. But there's nothing you can do about it because you're out of position, facing aggression from a decently strong range. So you're going to under-realize your equity. This is also bad for you. So, because of these 3 things, you would much prefer to 3-bet from the small blind in cash games with a rake. When you do 3-bet, a 3-bet means to re-raise, by the way, you're going to make it a bit more than the size of the pot. So, what is the size of the pot? You figure out the size of the pot by multiplying 3 times the last bet plus any additional money in the pot. So, say you are playing in a game where your opponent raises to 3 big blinds. You want to make it 3 times the last bet, 3 times 3, which is 9, plus any additional money in the pot. In this scenario, just the big blind. That would be 3 times 3, which is 9, plus 1 equals 10. Now, from out of position, you're going to want to re-raise a little bit larger than normal. So, if you normally want to make it 10 big blinds, maybe you make it more like 12 big blinds. When you're deep stacked, you also want to make it a little bit larger than normal. So, something like 12 or maybe 13 or 14. So, for simplicity, you're going to want to make it more like 4 times the last bet, plus any additional money. 1 additional unit from the small blind. So, that's usually going to end up being 4 to 4.5 times your opponent's raise. So, if they make it 5 big blinds, you're going to want to make it something like 22 big blinds. That may seem egregiously large, but you have to realize you don't care if the pot gets big because that helps mitigate your post-flop disadvantage because you're closer and closer to being all in. Like imagine you're all in before the flop, right? Then position is irrelevant because there is no more action. You're going to realize all of your equity. And making the pot bigger before the flop helps you realize your equity better, which will result in you generally playing better and, well, not being put in really nasty spots where you bet and then get raised and have no clue what to do because you're going to be getting such good odds. Also, when you're playing in a cash game, you want to consider whatever abnormalities are happening in the hand. If a tight player raises, you should play tighter, right? Because they're usually going to have a very strong range. You definitely do want to 3-bet tight players way less often. Against a loose player, you get to 3-bet way more often. The main exception to this is if they are going to 4-bet you every single time, in which case maybe you do start to develop a calling range with some of your hands that do flop extremely well. Against large raise sizes, you're typically going to play tighter because in order to continue, you have to put more money into the pot, which kind of forces you to have a better hand. Against small raise sizes, though, you get to play a little bit looser. With no rake, you play closer to what you would do in a tournament. And with a gigantic rake, you would play even tighter than the GTO range. So I have some examples of ranges lined up here for you. And what these charts are on the left is how you should play in a cash game with a rake and no ante. And these ranges are going to be pretty tight, tighter than you may be used to. wider than almost everyone is in live cash games, because most people in live cash games play far too loose. The charts over here are how you should play when there's an ante and no rake, which is the case in a tournament. These are 100 big blind charts. So we have small blind versus under the gun raise. Under the gun, 9-handed. So in this scenario, you're going to have to be very tight, because under the gun, 9-handed should be raising very tight. Now, if the under the gun player is raising super loose, then you get to continue wider. But if they're tight, you have to be tight too. So take a look at how tight you should be from the small blind against the under the gun raise. You should re-raise, 3-bet, with 5% of hands. Almost nothing. Jackson better. Ace-Jack suited and better. Ace-King offsuit. King-Queen suited. A few suited aces and a few suited connectors are 3-betting. Now look, I want to make it clear. This is about as tight as you will ever have to be. This is super tight. This is super nitty. And I would probably 3-bet slightly wider. But note here, no hands in green mean no calling. You should not call with anything in this scenario. The only exception to that is if you know the initial raiser's range is very, very strong and they're going to fold to a 3-bet almost never. If they're going to fold to a 3-bet almost never, then maybe you can start to develop a calling range with hands like jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, maybe a few suited connectors, maybe ace-jack suited, ace-10 suited, something like that. But even then, you may be better off just folding if you know your opponent's range is very, very strong. If they have literally aces, kings, queens, jacks, and ace-king, you just don't want to get involved. Their range is too good. And when you lack position and the rake's big, it's a bad spot. Now, in a game with an ante and no rake in each individual pot, which may be the case in some medium or high stakes games where they take rake every 30 minutes from everyone and not out of each individual pot, this is roughly what you can do. And this is about as wide as you can play against an under the gun player, because this presumes there's an ante in play. In most cash games today, there's not an ante. Maybe in your game there are. You have to figure out what's happening in your exact scenario. Now notice the hands that do not mind calling. These are the hands in green. Suited aces, some suited kings, suited connected hands, pairs, and the best offsuit high cards. These hands will call and see the flop. But if you play much looser than this, you are going to be torching your money. And that's especially going to be the case if there is no ante and there is a rake. I'm telling you, you're going to do way better if you only 3-bet or fold with a rake and no ante. Let's take a look at another spot. Here we have a small blind scenario versus a hijack raise. Now, this presumes the hijack raises, which would be under the gun if there were 5 players at the table. They raise and everybody folds to you. Now you see you're 3-betting wider, 8.2%, but still nothing insane. You're still super nitty, and you may be surprised to see that you should be this tight from the small blind, but you should. So many hand histories people send me start off with somebody raised from the hijack. I call from the small blind with 8-6 suited, and we went to the flop. But notice 8-6 suited is way down here in the fold when you're playing a cash game with a rake and no ante. Okay? 8-6 suited is okay to play, though, if there is an ante and no rake, like in a tournament. That's because you're getting way better pot odds. When you're getting better pot odds, you get to continue wider. All right? Notice again, you're just 3-betting a good, strong linear range in a cash game with a rake and no ante. Again, this is as tight as you will possibly need to be. Maybe you want to 3-bet a little bit looser, mainly with more suited aces, maybe a few suited kings, maybe a few suited connectors. But again, don't get carried away, because if your opponents are good, their ranges should be quite strong. Let's take a look at the small blind versus a button raise. This is about as wide as you can be against strong opponents in cash games with a rake and no ante. As you see, pocket sixes and better, most of the suited aces, ace-jack offsuit and better, king-9 suited and better, king-jack offsuit and better, and the best suited connected hands. Notably hands that are folding, 7-6 suited, pocket fours, king-10 offsuit, ace-2 suited. These are just getting out of the way. I know it seems nitty. It seems nitty. Most people don't go to play poker to fold the ace-2 suited or the pocket fours, but it is what you must do if you want to make money. You have to realize that you make money when you make better decisions than your opponents. And the thing is, in most small and medium stakes games, most players splash around a lot. They call from the small blind every time with the 8-6 suited in a cash game, and they just think it's normal. And everybody does it. And if everybody's making the same mistake, it doesn't really cost anyone anything on average. But you have to realize, if one player just starts playing way better than everybody else before the flop, well, now all these people's mistakes are going to start resulting in the player who's playing well collecting a lot of equity. And that is really, 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 really bad for the bad players, which is why the good players in small and medium stakes games have a gigantic win rate. A lot of people cannot believe that in 2023, when I'm making this video, people playing live cash games, up to 5, 10 no limit hold'em, maybe even bigger, are winning 10 big blinds per hour. That's like 25 big blinds per 100 hands, which is an insane win rate. A good win rate online is like 4 big blinds per 100 hands. You'd be thrilled. Live, though, you're getting something like 25 big blinds per 100 hands because people are horrible. They have all sorts of mistakes in their games. They went there to the casino. They put on their pants. They drove there. They sat down. They didn't go there to fold. That's a lot of effort. And because of that, if you play well, you will absolutely crush them. But you have to have the discipline and the desire to succeed. Notice in a tournament or a game with an ante and no rake, you get to play looser. But again, you're still 3-betting a lot. Most people in tournaments in this scenario call way too often, especially with the suited connectors and suited king type stuff. But notice, all these hands are 3-betting when you're playing about 100 big blinds deep. Get in there, splash around, battle, and put your opponent in nasty spots. Multi-way, I thought about loading up a lot of charts for multi-way scenarios, but really, they're not all that different from these charts I've already shown you. And essentially, you have to understand multi-way, your equity realization will be quite bad. It'll be even worse than when you're heads up, because now, if you have pocket fives and you call and the flop comes whatever, if you check and somebody bets and someone calls or anything, you just have to fold unless you have a set. So you never get to realize your equity with your medium strength hands, which is a disaster. And you just don't flop all that well all that often. So from the small blind, when there's a raise and a call, or a raise and a 3-bet, you're going to be re-raising again with every single hand you want to play, and your range will be very tight. It'll be somewhat similar to these previous ranges, but perhaps a little bit tighter. We have these charts, by the way, in the Poker Coaching app. You can download it in the various app stores, so make sure you check that out. So yeah, still 3-bet or fold with a strong linear range. Do not play looser. If you play 1-3 no limit hold'em at your local casino, it is very common to see raise to $12, call, small blind calls with the 9-4 suited because they're trying to flop something. They know to fold the Jack-4 offsuit, but the 9-4 suited for some reason gets them in, and then they end up losing their money when they make one bad pair. Don't do that. 3-bet or fold with strong hands. That is how to do it. Tight is right, it seems, especially when you're out of position and you're paying a rake and you're going to realize your equity poorly and you're not closing the action. When everything's bad for you, you got to play tight. That's me for today. If you enjoyed today's video, do me a favor. Click the like and subscribe button below. Click the notification bell. We have a whole lot more great videos lined up for you. Hope you learned a ton. I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you have the discipline to make the plays that you know are correct. Thanks for watching.